Welcome back to another episode of Vitals and Values. This is a special episode. We have Dr. Joey Munoz on the call. We've been friends for a few years now, and I'm just going to preface this. I had him on the podcast with John years ago, and I called him Munoz all episode. He had the grace to not call me out on the episode until the exact end, so I wanted to make sure I came out hot saying it correctly. And this episode is on menopause and fat loss, because I know this is very important to Lara's practice in general. So looking forward to this conversation.
Absolutely. This is a very common issue that patients come in with. So I'm really excited to talk to you more, Joey, about what you do for women in this specific time of life.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you guys for having me on.
Looking forward
David,
to
we've been friends for too long, not just for a little while, for too long.
I mean, we're at the point now where I think 80% of our conversations is talking crap to each other. Maybe 20% is positive reinforcement.
As you sip on some cancerous diet soda.
Yeah, it's actually a Fresca. It's Diet Coke. It's basically not the same thing, but it is the same thing.
As an aside, I find it hilarious how Fresca says sparkling flavored water or something like that instead of soda. Marketing.
All right, I'm not going to name names, but this is actually hysterical before we start. So I have a friend, and hey, we all have our own belief systems, our own bias, and I do my best to, if that's the way you want to eat and that's the way you want to live, I'm not going to tell you otherwise unless you ask for my perspective. I have some friends that are like on the crunchier side of like, they're scared of their own shadow, of chemicals, all this kind of stuff. So we just had them up at the beach house this past weekend, and they're against aspartame, all these artificial sugars and everything. And sure enough, she pops open a Fresca and starts sipping on it. And I'm like really confused, because I'm like, I know she's not for this. I had just gotten done with a discussion with her husband about how the clinical research is 50 milligrams per kilogram body weight in aspartame per day, which is the equivalent of me drinking like 40 plus of these a day, is like where the limit is. And he's like, I can't believe that. The FDA must be paying somebody off. And I'm like, that's just where the data's at, man. What do you want from me? And then we just had to done with that conversation. Here's this woman who's against all synthetic sugars, all this kind of stuff, drinking a Fresca. And I'm like, I looked at her, I'm like, I was just being real. I was like, hey, you know there's aspartame or one of the artificial sugars in that. And she's like, I thought this is just sparkling water, right? And I look at her, and I'm like, no, there's either sucralose or aspartame. I don't know which one it is. And she looks at it, she reads through it, and she sees it, and her whole face dropped. And like, you could tell she didn't want to finish the drink. And like, she just quietly set it down and kept going on with her day. And I'm like, marketing got you. You didn't know that. That's an artificial sugar in it.
How we could go down a rabbit hole here, so let's not. But I was just going to say, how do you think it's sweet? Like, water's not sweet.
Right, that's what I think too. It's not LaCroix.
Yeah.
I personally call LaCroix the crap, because I'd rather have just water, or give me the artificial sweet stuff, or water. I don't like the in-between.
David, you're just uncultured. Anyways.
Yes. Well, thank you for being on the podcast, Joey. Do you want to give a little bio about your training, education, what you do?
Yeah, of course. So formal education and training is in, for lack of a better term, functional nutrition. And what I mean by that is I worked in a lab where we studied functional foods, meaning what are the disease preventative effects of particular foods. So we were talking about this a little bit before. I did some work. My dissertation specifically was on how dried plums can help slow down the rate of bone loss as we age. Worked on some projects looking at how black beans specifically can help with cardiovascular health and slowing down the progression of atherosclerosis. Did some work on like bitter melon and prediabetes management with blood sugar and A1C and all that stuff. So that was like my formal training, clinical training. After my PhD, I worked for a short period of time in another lab doing a postdoctoral fellowship with a professor that I really looked up to. I actually wanted to do my PhD with him, and he was too popular for me. So like, he had a full lab and he was like, sorry, dude. And I was like, oh man, all right. And then had the opportunity to work with him for my postdoc. And that was more of a like sports nutrition, body composition focused lab, which is what I've always really been passionate about. And then after my postdoc, I really kind of felt like a failure, because I was like, I have all this education and now I'm doing this online coaching stuff. Jokes aside, I didn't really feel like a failure. I just felt like I went to school for so long and didn't really use my degree. And little do I know that my degree has been incredibly helpful because there's so much, only curse word, guys, I promise. There's so much crap online when it comes to social media regarding health and fitness, right? But anyways, before even starting graduate school, I used to work as a personal trainer. I've always been super passionate about health and fitness. I grew up in a household where both my parents really cared about health. So I was fortunate enough to see like both of my parents working out my whole life. And always really cared about that, worked as a personal trainer. And I remember when I was finishing my graduate studies, trying to figure out what I was going to do professionally. And for a number of reasons, I didn't really feel like I felt comfortable or fit in the traditional like academic environment of being a professor, even though that's what I was trained to be. And I remember that I always really enjoyed working with people.
You're way too cool to be a professor. I'm just big.
Dude, I know.
Sorry, all professors.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, dude. Like professors don't say dude, you know?
You'd have way too many beers with your students.
Way too many
and you'd get
beers.
in trouble for that.
I actually don't really drink, man. If I do, it's ever just a little bit of bourbon. And stop interrupting, David. And
he can't help himself.
What was I saying? I've always really enjoyed working with people. And when I finished my graduate studies, I had the opportunity to work with Dr. Elaine Norton, who's somebody who I looked up to for a long time in the industry. He offered me a position to be a coach on his team. I remember my wife, I was actually hesitant because I was like, I have a PhD and I'm going to do this thing. And my wife was like, you want to do it and it's somebody you've looked up to, you should just do it at least for a year. And if it doesn't work out, you could always just come back to what you were doing before. I was like, makes sense. And then the rest is kind of history. And loved working with people. It was really cool to be able to help people, not just from an exercise perspective when I was a personal trainer, but really from a nutritional, exercise, and lifestyle perspective. So much of this stuff, as you know, David, goes beyond just like, what do you eat? What does your workout plan look like? But really helping people like develop healthy habits that are simple and integrate into like the context of their overall lifestyle. And I worked with Lane for about 3 years. That was 2 years ago now. I eventually left that position, started my own company, which is Fit for Life Academy. And we primarily work with people who are around 35 to 65 years of age who are looking to improve health, improve body composition, lose body fat in a way that's actually healthy and sustainable. So I guess that's a quick background there on me. And
So your business has been around 2 years, you said?
Officially, yes. I was working on it for years before that, like kind of in the background, and then officially launched 2 years ago. And
so it's an online program, is that correct?
Correct. So we work with people exclusively online, and it's a very educational service where we help people not only develop healthier habits around nutrition and exercise in their lifestyle, but really learn about the science behind why they're doing what they're doing. I believe so much in education, and I feel like one of the big reasons, obviously it's multifaceted, but I feel like one of the big reasons why people struggle with health and fitness for so long is because they're simply just following plans blindly, right? It's the phrase of, if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. If you teach him to fish, you feed him for life. I feel like when it comes to this health and fitness stuff, people just like are given a fish in the sense that like they follow this diet plan, they follow that workout plan, but they don't really know why it works or why it doesn't work. So when they get stuck, they just get frustrated. So education is a huge part of what we do. And then obviously there's an accountability piece as well, because people need help with consistency more than anything else.
And we specifically wanted to talk today about menopause and fat loss.
Yeah.
Which is this like, do you have a specific program for this, or how did you get involved in this topic?
Yeah, so involved in this topic primarily because we work with a lot of menopausal women. Based off just my experience, one, we tend to work with the slightly older population just because our message isn't get ripped for the summer, right? And I feel like the health-focused message tends to attract a slightly older clientele. And I've also realized that from a coaching perspective, women tend to just be more receptive to looking for help and accepting help and support than men are. So naturally, we just tend to work with more women than men. And
Joe,
Lara, did you get David at all?
I think Lara looked at me like,
did
my
she?
soul felt that.
I barely noticed. So we just naturally work with a lot of women who are either peri or postmenopausal. And transparently, and we'll get into this, obviously women experience a ton of changes during that transition. And that said, what needs to be done from a strategic perspective when it comes to nutrition or training is not that much different than a man or a younger person in terms of like philosophically, what should they be doing to lose fat and build muscle? I know one of the things that we slightly talked about before starting the episode is that sometimes women who are going through that transition in their life feel like their body's completely different and doesn't work the same way anymore. And I totally understand why those feelings arise. That said, we could definitely jump into the physiology as to like what changes are actually being experienced, but why that doesn't actually break how your physiology works.
I think that would be a great place to start, because at least from my perspective, seeing a lot of women in the perimenopausal age range, I hear this concern and complaint all the time. So many women are like, I'm gaining weight, I can't not gain weight, nothing changed, but my body's changing. And so how do you start that conversation with women?
Well, starting the conversation, I think, is by validating the feelings they're experiencing, right? Because if you're trying to help somebody, you're not going to start the relationship off too well if you're just like, no, you're wrong, right? So first and foremost, validating the changes they're experiencing, because they are experiencing changes. First and foremost, it is absolutely a fact that there are changes in how your body distributes fat, right? I'm sure you've probably have worked with and heard from a lot of women who are saying like, maybe my weight itself hasn't even changed much, but I'm experiencing more belly fat, for example, right? And that's because estrogen plays a role in how our bodies store fat and what areas our bodies store fat. And normally women tend to store fat more around the hips than they do in the midsection, and men are vice versa. Obviously, there are exceptions to every rule. That is, to an extent, regulated by estrogen specifically. And when women stop producing estrogen during menopause, there can be a redistribution in terms of how we store fat. So you'll start to see more abdominal fat, less fat around the hips, for example, right? So there's a change in the way your body distributes fat. And that's not a good or a bad thing. It's just like we go through changes as we age, right? It'd be silly to just want to be in our 20-year-old body our whole life. I am hesitant to say that because some people are like, yeah, I want to be that way. But it's like, hey, it's
not reality.
We're going through life and we change, right? And that's completely normal. David, you were going to say something.
No, but and then that goes like I've heard this quote from women all the time, like when they say like they're bulking or eating differently, and it's like, I want my butt to get fatter and my abs to get flatter, and like that's, and then all of a sudden you hit perimenopause, menopause, and it flips.
Yeah, and so you mentioned a little bit about the physiology with estrogen loss, but is there any more to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to add a couple of things. And it's also true that some women obviously experience thyroid complications during menopause as well, right? So obviously getting blood work done, making sure everything is within healthy levels is super important. If you have hypothyroidism, that's going to affect your metabolic rate. That's going to make weight gain substantially easier. Obviously, what I'm talking about here is excluding that if you are going through certain hormonal changes besides estrogen loss. And
sorry, can I ask a question? Are you seeing more thyroid problems at that age, you're saying?
So transparently, with the women we work with, like we don't look at blood work or anything like that because it's outside of the scope of what we're doing specifically. What I will say is, anecdotally, not really, in the sense that we haven't had many cases where women just are not responding to an appropriate protocol if they're being adherent. I think it's more of the stuff that I was going to bring up after this. Like,
sorry.
No, it's perfectly fine. That's a great question. There is a potential decrease in your metabolic rate, and it's not as a byproduct of like menopause specifically, but just as we age, we tend to lose muscle mass, and that rate of muscle loss tends to rapidly increase into our 40s, but our 50s and our 60s, right? So it also tends to be around the age where we start to lose muscle mass at a pretty fast rate if we're not focusing on proper training. And we can maybe segue a little bit, because oftentimes people talk about this whole concept that like muscle doesn't really burn that much energy, and just because you have 5 pounds more of muscle or 5 less pounds of muscle, it doesn't like make a big difference in your energy expenditure. I think in many ways that's a flawed argument, but nonetheless, our muscle mass contributes to our metabolic rate. As we age, we lose muscle mass, so our metabolic rate can decline. There's also changes to like appetite regulation, because estrogen also plays a role in appetite regulation. And then a big, big, big one that is kind of like a overarching confounding factor are sleep disturbances, right? Going through hot flashes, night sweats, anxiety, stress, like all of this can contribute to poor sleep. And we 100% know that poor sleep negatively impacts muscle mass, body fat distribution, energy expenditure, hunger regulation. So it's kind of like, I really do think that sleep disturbances is something that we don't put enough focus on, because it does have a pretty big impact.
I agree with that. I have a hard time getting people to buy into that. They don't feel that it's that big of a deal. But I 100% agree with you.
Yeah, we literally try to tell our clients that And people think about exercise and nutrition, and I think sleep is one of the 3 pillars that's equally as important as the other 2. We can take a second to talk about this. Like, the data is pretty clear
Please do.
that if you sleep poorly, you are hungrier even if you're eating the same amount of food as somebody else, where like everything is matched. And body weight, muscle mass, age, body composition. Like, if you are sleep deprived and you normally eat 2,000 calories and feel fine, you might eat 2,000 calories and still feel hungry because it impacts how your body regulates hunger. There's also subjective data showing that when you are sleep deprived, you tend to crave more calorically dense foods, which makes it easier to go over on your calories. There's a decrease in energy expenditure, and that one's pretty easy to explain. If you are just tired, you're not moving as much, so you're not burning as many calories, and sleep negatively impacts exercise recovery. And I also want to put a caveat here, because it's like, none of us really get perfect sleep, and as we age, it just gets worse and worse. We just tell our clients to do our best and actually prioritize sleep. The same way when we talk about diet, it's not about having a perfect diet. It's about being consistent with diet. It's like, let's have a healthy sleep routine, a healthy sleep schedule, and do our best. Yes, David, I see your finger. What's up?
Joey, I know you have 2 children.
I do.
But it is undeniable that my potential quality of sleep is the same as yours. Even with your potential temper tantrum children and all, like, no, there's no excuses. And you need to prioritize 8 hours of sleep regardless of your children. And regardless, no, I'm just kidding. It's like the personal trainer.
8 hours of sleep. I do my best, but that's what I say. When I say do your best, is like, set up your environment to get the best sleep possible within the context of your lifestyle. Everything that I always talk to our clients about, and David, I'm sure you agree with this fully, is like, let's do our best within the context of our lifestyle, because we all have different constraints. And why stress ourselves out about not getting 8 hours of sleep if we like actually can't do that? But we do have control around when we go to sleep. What does our sleep environment look like? The temperature, light, staring at our phone. So if you get 6 hours of sleep, there's also a difference in the quality of sleep based off your sleep environment, right? So I usually just tell people, like, let's optimize your sleep hygiene, and let's do the best we can given the context of what you're going through. Because like, I don't get 8 hours of sleep. I wish I did. My son wakes up like 2 or 3 times a night. I'm
no
up 2 or 3 times a night every night.
No kids and no over. Come on, if I can do it, you can do it.
Is there any like actual research on like the amount, or do you not even go to that? Because I know you said, like,
yeah, there definitely is. I mean, 7 to 8 hours is not just like a blanket statement. The research does tend to support that people that get 8 hours of sleep more or less have better health-related outcomes. But what people need to understand about research is that it is an average, right, of the population, and people lie on a spectrum. There's also research showing that like too much sleep, 10, 12 hours, is definitely not great either. And like too little sleep is not great either. There are people that do fine probably on 6 hours of sleep. I think, I don't want to get into statistics here, but most things fall into like a normal distribution. When we talk about 8 hours of sleep, it's kind of like the average, so the middle. But within a standard deviation of that, and I don't know what this standard deviation for sleep is, but let's say it's plus or minus 1 hour, and like 70% of the population falls within that range, right? The standard deviation might be more than an hour, which means that a large percentage of the population might do perfectly fine on like an hour or 2 less of sleep, and a percentage of the population might need more than the average of 8, right? I think it's fairly easy to judge subjectively whether you feel rested or not, and even though it's not an extremely objective measure. Like, if you're waking up feeling pretty refreshed, not extremely fatigued, obviously there are other factors as well, like life stress, work, recovery from exercise, that'll play a role there. But I think as a general rule, it's kind of easy to tell whether you're getting adequate sleep. And you can definitely tell when you prioritize sleep hygiene a little bit more, when that impacts your quality of sleep positively, right? Because you definitely feel a little bit better the next day.
Now, you had mentioned before too about the metabolic rate, because this is something that I hear a lot, that people talk about how their metabolism is slowing down. And you mentioned it a little bit, but can you talk a little bit more about how you explain that to people and what's truly happening?
Yep. Yes. Our metabolism, you hear this word getting thrown around like left and right. I have a fast metabolism. I have a slow metabolism. I was actually just talking to somebody a couple hours ago who was telling me that they've been yo-yo dieting for the past decade, and they feel like their biggest challenge is that their metabolism is broken because they've been yo-yo dieting for 10 years. And I was just trying to explain why like that isn't true. Like, your metabolism still needs to function, right? Because by definition, if we Sometimes people use the word metabolism interchangeably with our basal metabolic rate. Let's say we're going to use those two things interchangeably. I'll explain what that is in a second. But by definition, it's like the energy our body needs to stay alive, right? So if you are alive and you are functioning like a normal human, your metabolism is not broken by any means, because it's essentially the amount of energy that your body needs to do things like regulate your body temperature, keep your organs functioning, your brain, your liver, right? It's all of the physiological processes that our body must require in order to maintain normal physiological function and keep us alive. And their energy required is fairly consistent, right? Sure, your body might burn a little bit more energy if you're in a colder environment to maintain your core body temperature and vice versa. But in general, it's pretty stable. And the biggest variability there is just total body weight, because the more you weigh, like the higher your basal metabolic rate is. This is one of the reasons why people lose weight and they stop losing weight. And they're like, my metabolism is broken. It's like, no, your energy expenditure just decreased as a normal byproduct of losing weight. Because I think a very simple analogy, and I use this to explain to clients, it's like, what takes more energy? Throwing a 1 pound ball or pushing a 100-pound boulder? Pushing a 100-pound boulder, right? Like, your body's no different. It requires more energy if you have a bigger body. That said, can you recap the question again? Because I just went into explaining what metabolism is, but I know you had a specific.
Well, I hear so frequently that people are concerned that their metabolism is slowing down significantly at menopause.
Yeah. Great question. So basal metabolic rate itself, your metabolism, the amount of energy that your body needs to keep you alive, is actually pretty stable throughout your entire life. I am horrible at remembering very, very specific details. I say this because I think the data shows that between like mid-20s, maybe up to like the time you're 65 and 70, if you account for body composition staying fairly consistent, meaning muscle mass and fat mass, your metabolism is pretty stable throughout your entire life. And the reason why I say accounting for variables like muscle mass is because muscle mass is metabolically active. And if you lose muscle mass, your metabolic rate will decrease. But if you maintain muscle mass, it really doesn't. And then we do start to see a decline after like the age of 70. It's fairly gradual. It's not massive by any means. I think there's a couple of reasons. One is like, you can't beat age, right? At some point you start losing muscle mass, muscle atrophies. You also see older people like are typically really cold and wearing sweaters. That means they can't regulate their body temperature as well. So metabolic rate does tend to decrease, but it's like way later in life than most people think it happens, right? What does tend to happen though is that we might have a decrease in our total daily energy expenditure, which is different than our metabolism. Our metabolism is a component of our total daily energy expenditure, right? So metabolism, BMR, simply the amount of calories or energy, and you can use those terms interchangeably. Calories are just a unit of measurement of energy. Most people are like, this food has this many calories. Foods technically don't have calories. Like, they're not a tangible thing. It's a measure of energy, the same way that pounds are a measure of mass, right? Like, a pound isn't a physical, tangible thing. It's a way we measure mass, right? So calories are no different. So it's a measure of energy. We burn a certain amount through our metabolism, but the amount that we burn on any given day is some number above your metabolism, because your metabolism is just a component of the amount of energy that you burn any given day. And the additional stuff is like the energy you burn through exercise, the energy you burn just like through movement and fidgeting throughout the day. So like non-exercise activities, right? And then also the amount of energy that you burn just like metabolizing and digesting food, which is actually quite high. I think it's 10 to 15%. Obviously, that number is variable based off what you're eating. But our total daily energy expenditure can decrease as we age, and that can potentially make weight loss harder. And again, it's not inherent. It's not that aging makes your energy expenditure be lower. It's that our lifestyles change. We tend to be a little bit more sedentary. We tend to be a little bit more sedentary. There's also a change to, oftentimes we're better off financially when we're older. So like, we can afford luxuries that we can't when we're younger, that contribute to us living a more sedentary lifestyle. I was talking about the loss of muscle mass earlier. One of the reasons why I don't like the argument when people are like, muscle doesn't really contribute much to your energy expenditure is from scientific data showing that a pound of muscle really only burns anywhere between 6 to 10 calories per day. But that's at rest, right? So first and foremost, if you take 5 pounds of muscle, that's anywhere between 35 to 50 calories, which is not, I don't think it's negligible by any means. That's 350 calories a week, but that's a complete rest. And then typically, if you have more muscle, it means you're exercising. Now your workouts are more intense, so you're actually burning more calories through exercise. You probably feel a little bit better. You have more energy. You have less joint pain and discomfort, so you could probably move more freely throughout the day. And I think all of those things do definitely add up to a quite significant contribution to your total daily energy expenditure. So that loss of muscle mass as we age can definitely contribute to a decrease in energy expenditure, in the fact that like you might be a little bit more sedentary. Your metabolism might be objectively a tiny bit lower. If you're exercising, you're probably not exercising as intensely, and those things add up. And then
So you're saying that the metabolism isn't inherently just going down through your 60s, but your movement changes and your muscle mass changes if you're not working on it, and that plays a role into why people are seeing the changes. And so if women are like, hey, it's my hormones, can I get my hormones checked? Like, how do you address that? Because that's such a common question.
Yeah. Go get your hormones checked.
And then what?
Yeah.
Don't do anything with the data?
Well, it's funny because it depends, right? Like there might be hormonal things going on. Like I mentioned, like if somebody does have hypothyroidism, like does it make things more difficult? Of course. Some women, obviously, and this is completely outside of my scope of work, but like benefit from certain hormone replacement therapies. So given that you get blood work done and nothing is wrong with your hormones besides your estrogen being way lower.
Mm-hmm.
And then typically the particular modalities that we would implement from a nutrition and exercise perspective would not be that much different than what you or I would do.
So then when you go into that nutrition and exercise, how do you address that?
Yeah. So I like to think about three main pillars. And then I just want to give a quick validation as to why women feel like everything they've always done isn't working anymore. Because that is true, right? I feel like sometimes these conversations come off as a saying that women who are experiencing these changes are just completely wrong in the way they feel. And that's not true. It's just that the justification as to why they think they're going through those changes is what's actually wrong, right? Because you start to play this narrative in your brain that there's something inherently wrong with you, that you're broken, that you're going through menopause and like you're not human anymore. Now you're like a different species and your physiology works completely differently. And that's not true. But what you're experiencing is true. You probably are putting a lot of effort and not seeing results, right? And what I've noticed specifically with women in this age range, Lara, particularly like in this time and age, is that if we think about the women who are going through menopause at the moment, let's say early 50s, that would take us to what, like the 80s, 90s, kind of like teenage, early 20 years. And the main narrative for women when it came to exercise and like just body image and all of that back then was just be as skinny as possible. And I know that narrative is changing a ton now, but the women who are going through menopause at the moment, like that was the main narrative, right? And so their whole experience with fitness culture has been, don't lift weights because it makes you bulky. Let's do as much cardio as possible to burn calories and be super thin. And let's starve ourselves because calories matter and we're going to eat as little as them as possible so we can just shrink. And that has carried on to the stuff they try to do now, right? It's like, let's do more and more cardio because I had a cookie and a cookie is bad. I'm going to eat as little as possible. Now I'm just like super fatigued and crashing and not sleeping well and not recovering well. And I'm not going to lift weights because it's going to make me too bulky. I can't tell you how many times I've heard this narrative. And I really do think, and maybe it's my perspective because of the people that I follow and the stuff that I see on social media, I really do think that that narrative is changing, but it's still so prevalent within that age range for women specifically. And the reason why it doesn't work is because, one, when you're younger, like your body is primed to hold on to muscle mass, right? Like we just have higher muscle mass in our 20s than we do in our 50s. Your physiology definitely doesn't work as optimally as it should from a body composition perspective compared to when you were 20. So if now you're just doing a ton of cardio, you're crash dieting, you're doing nothing to actually improve your health and your body composition, and focusing on building muscle mass and improving your body composition is the best thing you can possibly do to put yourself in a state that is as healthy as possible metabolically specifically, right? So the approach of just exercise more, do more cardio, don't lift weights, eat as little as possible. And I'll say even this, like when it comes to don't lift weights, I feel like most women now are like, I know I need to lift weights, but then you see them lifting weights and it's like, you're doing cardio with a 2-pound dumbbell in your hand. It's not weight lift, right? It really is. It's like, it's not going to stimulate any muscle growth. You're doing.
I've had people like, I'm doing planks. I'm like, that's not strict training. And they have 5-pound dumbbells. I'm with you. I hear that all the time.
Yeah. So the point is that it's not that you're not putting an effort. You're probably putting a ton of effort. It's just the strategies you're using are the wrong strategies. They somewhat quote unquote work back then because they made you lose weight and you were super skinny, but like they definitely don't work for what you actually need to do in terms of improving health and body composition and actually being able to develop a leaner physique, because just because you're going through menopause, again, you're not going to have the same body you had when you were 20. But you can see tremendous improvements in your body composition. You really can. We've worked with a lot of women, not just in their 50s, but even in like starting off literally in their 60s. And it's really cool to see what sort of changes they can experience physically when they start doing the right things. And we can dive into what the right things are. I like to think of it as like 3 main principles, and they're around nutrition, training, and lifestyle. But I use the term principles because I think it encompasses like the perspective that women have when it comes to these particular variables. So when it comes to nutrition, like principle I like to focus on is to help, and I'm going to say women going through menopause, but this really applies to everybody, to focus on fueling your body and providing your body with what it actually needs for the goal that you're trying to achieve, rather than seeing nutrition as a means to just slash food as low as possible and lose weight. That's not what a healthy and sustainable diet does, right? Like, people don't also think about, to quote Lane, he says this beautifully, like the diet after the diet. So many people are just like, I'm going on a diet to lose weight. I'm just going to eat as little as possible. It's like, okay, let's say everything goes perfectly and you lose those 20 pounds. Then what? How are you going to keep the weight off if what you've been doing this whole time isn't really sustainable, right? So I focus on this principle of fueling rather than eating as little as possible, because it really sets you up for the right mindset when it comes to nutrition, and it actually helps you improve the health of your metabolism by helping you prioritize exercise recovery and muscle growth, which we'll talk about next. So with nutrition, if we break this down into objective recommendations, first off, don't overly restrict food, in the sense that if you feel like you're starving, you probably are starving. And then starving is not good, right? Like when you think of the word starving, you don't tend to think of like, oh, that's healthy, right? And we want to be healthy, right? Like think about having a lean, healthy body. Those things have to go hand in hand. It's not just about the way your body looks. It's also about the things you do. They have to contribute to health. So when it comes to objective recommendations, prioritize whole foods. Pretty simple and straightforward. Whole foods tend to be more nutritionally dense. They also help with hunger regulation. Truthfully, if you're leaning towards higher carbohydrate and higher protein whole food sources, it's kind of hard to overeat. And again, there are exceptions to every rule, but like naturally whole foods tend to be so satiating, right? So whole foods from a nutritional perspective, number 1 rule, focusing on appropriate amounts of protein and fiber specifically. When it comes to protein, there is some evidence that as we age, we might want to consume slightly higher amounts of protein, simply because our bodies don't respond to protein as easily as it did when we were younger. It's technically called a little bit of anabolic resistance, in the sense that like a certain amount of protein will stimulate anabolism, complicated term, analogy being muscle growth for lack of a better term. 30 grams of protein will stimulate that a lot more when you're younger than it does when you're older. So I think for older people, it probably makes sense to lean a little bit closer to like a gram of protein per pound of ideal body weight. Right? So if you're 170, you want to get down to 150, try to aim for at least 150 grams of protein. If you can't hit that, not a massive deal. If you can get to at least 0.8 grams, that's going to be a pretty good starting place. I feel like nowadays people understand the importance of protein, but still fiber is completely underrated. And fiber is so important, making sure we're getting 25 to 30 grams of fiber. David?
Do protein bars count? Would they have fiber in them?
Quest bars and what's the soda? Olipop's.
Yeah, there's a new soda that has fiber in it.
There is?
Olipop?
Poppy is like all right in fiber. It's not that high. They're great. We love them, but they're not that high in fiber. I think Olipop has like 10 grams of fiber. But making sure we get adequate fiber, super important. And then make sure we're getting sufficient produce, fruits and vegetables. It's not like the sexy stuff at all. And if somebody's listening to this and they're like, really, that's what you have to say about nutrition? Chances are like you're probably not doing that.
Yes. Now, what about,
it's the truth.
I feel like so many women, and this is probably from back in the 90s, or maybe it's still now, but like they're all afraid of carbs. And how do you see that? Do you address that?
Yeah. Let me ask you a funny question, Lara. When people say carbs, what foods are they typically referring to?
Pasta, bread, maybe rice. At least
okay, those are carbs. Because I was going to say, people mostly, sometimes they're like cookies. or ice cream.
Yeah,
Gotta
right.
avoid carbs. And sometimes those foods are just like way more fat than they are carbs, right?
Yeah,
They're just
that's
like
true.
calorie bombs. But yeah, when it comes to things like bread, pasta, rice, absolutely nothing wrong with those foods within the context of a well-balanced diet. I will say, for regulating appetite and hunger regulation, going towards more fiber-heavy carbohydrates is going to be beneficial. So when people think about carbs, it's funny because it's either the cakes.
All right, I'm sorry, I got to pause because this is a great opportunity for a
gonna ask
lifelong
this too.
debate. All right, so I argue that your plants that are primarily carbs, like broccoli, okay? Broccoli is technically a carb, correct?
Yes.
He's a PhD. I win. She doesn't
I mean,
like
it's
that. I win.
primarily
I just think-
carbohydrate.
It is, but I don't think I would ever classify it to a person as a carb if we're talking
Yeah,
about
yeah,
eating
for sure.
carbs. So
Well,
I
that's
disagree.
what I was going to allude to when I was even talking about when I was just saying like hunger regulation and managing like
Mhm.
caloric intake. It's like people say carbs and I meant cookies, cakes, whatever. Let's say they're a little bit more educated and they say carbs, rice, or whatever.
Mhm.
When people say carbs, they never really immediately think about things like beans,
Mhm.
potatoes, roots,
Mhm.
sweet potatoes. These are extremely high carb foods that are on a per calorie basis kind of more satiating than pretty much anything else. I mean, objectively speaking, a white potato is technically the most satiating food on a per calorie basis. So these sorts of carbohydrates are incredibly difficult to overconsume just because they're not that very calorically dense. They're honestly not hyper palatable in the sense that they're not the most delicious thing in the world. And when I talk about a white potato, I'm not talking about like adding some butter and cheese
Deep
and salt
fried,
and pepper, 'cause
cut
that's
and butter.
delicious, right? Like I'm talking about a plain white potato.
French fries.
So they really, yeah. I mean, come on, dude, some hot sauce on a potato. Pretty good stuff. But if you eat more of these foods, you will naturally not overconsume calories. I think, Lara, and we can go into this because some people will be listening to this and be like, well, I do that and I'm still not seeing the changes that I want. Like I eat pretty healthy. And that's because there are more things to focus on than just your diet.
Mhm.
But really thinking about nutrition from a perspective of like, how do I actually fuel my body to give it what it needs versus how do I restrict as much as possible? Right? Because here's the thing, and Lara, sorry to interrupt you. And
No,
I
you're
had
fine.
actually, I know we originally talked about doing this podcast because I did an episode on my podcast about this, but something I didn't even talk about that just came to mind is that being as restrictive as possible with your diet will almost guaranteed lead to particular nutritional deficiencies, right? And vitamins and minerals are very, very important for optimal physiological function and optimal hormonal function as well. And so if women, to give some credibility to my hormones, like if you're nutritionally deficient and restricting your food as much as possible, there will be hormonal issues going on, right? Specifically if you do it for prolonged periods of time. And that's where things like RED-S, which is relative energy deficiency syndrome, can come into play. And those are legit issues. And that's why from a nutritional perspective, it's important to fuel your body appropriately.
For women who are already not happy with their weight and they're coming to you and you tell them, well, I want you to not think about eating less. I find that conversation very difficult because they don't want to eat more. And I know, is it mainly just changing which types of foods they're eating, or how do you address that?
Yeah. Can we role play for a second?
Sure.
Because this, I think we were talking about this a little bit before we even started. It comes down to context and expectations,
Mhm.
right? If you, I think naturally, if you are combative with somebody who you haven't built trust with yet, why should they trust you, right? I think like learning to be a little bit persuasive is incredibly important, especially if you have good intentions. Obviously, sometimes people are persuasive and they don't have good intentions, and that's a shitty person. Sorry, curse word number 2. But in general, you need to learn how to leverage psychology so that the person understands your point of view and actually sees how your approach is the right approach for their particular goals. So if I was working with a client who is postmenopausal, they feel like they're overweight and they want to restrict their diet so that they can lose weight, I would never tell them, hey, we're going to eat more. That's actually what you need to do, and not say anything about supporting their weight loss goals. I would say, hey, I am completely on board with you. And what we're going to do is actually what you need to do to support those weight loss goals. And I would have a conversation like this. Pretend you are the client, okay?
Mhm.
And tell me that you're a little bit hesitant to perhaps like focus on fueling yourself and eating more versus restricting all the time.
Well, I just don't like how I feel, and I feel bloated all the time, and I'm already not happy with my weight. And I'm already eating healthy. I eat salads all the time and chicken, and I don't know what else to do.
Yeah. So it sounds, Lara, like you've been eating pretty healthy. And based off the conversation we've had, you've also told me that you've lost weight multiple times in the past. You always tend to put it back on. It's getting harder as you get older, right? And every time you've done that, it's by restricting yourself and eating as little as possible. Is that true?
Yes.
Yeah, just role play. Like, let's say you
Okay.
are this person, right? Yeah. And Lara, every time you have restricted yourself as much as possible and really tried to eat as little as possible to lose weight, how does that make you feel?
Well, I'm hungry all the time, but I'm not as bloated, so that's great. And I see the results, and I do lose the weight, but I can't keep it off.
Yeah. And would you agree that the goal is not just to lose 20 pounds? It's really to lose 20 pounds of body fat, improve your health, but also be able to maintain the weight loss long term?
Yeah, I would want that.
Yeah. So I would challenge the way you're thinking about this because you said that it works. If it's not contributing to your long-term goals, it doesn't work, right? There's a reason why we're having this conversation. There's a reason why every time you have lost weight using these methods, you've gained the weight back. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And now I know it feels a little bit scary. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I feel like nothing has really changed though.
Yeah, because you've technically been using kind of like the same approaches over and over again. And those approaches, like literally by definition, don't work long term. Let me ask you a question. Because you've mentioned that you've lost weight multiple times in the past using some of these restrictive diets. I'm assuming that you also lose weight really quickly and you want to see quick weight loss. And transparently, Lara, like our approach, what we're going to work on is not going to help you lose 20 pounds in the next 30 days. Because ethically, I would never want to support that because really fast weight loss tends to be overly restrictive and unsustainable. And if you lose weight really quickly, you aren't developing healthy lifestyle habits and you're probably just going to put the weight back on, which is what's happened to you over and over again. What I can guarantee though is that our approach will help you lose weight perhaps a little bit slower, but you won't feel super hungry. You won't feel like you're starving yourself. You won't feel bloated either because we're going to talk about the appropriate food choices that actually work with your digestion. You might have sensitivities to particular foods and the whole process will be more enjoyable. And when you lose the weight, it'll be a lot easier to sustain long term. So if you don't mind me asking you, why would you want to lose 20 pounds using these restrictive methods again over the next month or so? If every time you've done that, you've gained weight, wouldn't it feel better to maybe take 4, 5, 6 months to lose that weight and actually be able to keep it off?
But I had this trip to Florida coming up, and I want to look good.
Yeah. We could look good for the trip to Florida, don't worry.
I just hear that a lot.
Right? So
I mean,
just like
that's
having
obviously
that sort
why.
of conversation. No, for sure, for sure. And, sometimes it comes down to like challenging the way they're thinking about that
Okay.
and being transparent. Be like, hey, in a month, your trip to Florida, you're not going to be in the shape you want to be in, but you will feel a lot better than you do right now because a month of developing healthy habits is going to have an impact on the way you feel. But it's having that conversation. I don't even go into the weeds of the science. I just go into the weeds of like their psychology and helping them understand that the stuff they've always done has never really helped them. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And they see the quick weight loss, but they always gain the weight back. Like typically when I have that conversation, because I've had this exact conversation, they're like, yeah, it works. I lose weight and I want to lose weight. I'm like, you don't want to lose weight. You want to keep it off. Like, do you want to go through this over and over again? It's like, the answer is never yes. And I'm like, yeah, what you're doing, that's one of the reasons why you're doing this with your weight. Right. And like having a slower, more sustainable approach is the way to do it. And then I sell it as you're not going to starve yourself. You don't have to avoid going out with friends. You can still enjoy yourself. There's plenty of flexibility. It's going to feel more sustainable and enjoyable. You're going to feel better. Like, all of the positive feelings that are associated with having a healthier approach, I think is what helps some women get the emotional buy-in to at least say, yes, I'm going to try this. And then once we actually start trying and they see how good it actually feels, it kind of just like builds that internal motivation to keep doing it.
Yeah. And so that's very helpful from the nutrition standpoint. Then how do you have that conversation with the strength training or the exercise piece?
Yeah, this can be a little tricky. I will say, and I think I shared this before after, and it's not the luxury that everybody has, but given that we've worked with many women going through this, like we obviously have videos and case studies of clients that were open to adopting this approach. And we share that with potential clients who are a little doubtful, and usually seeing somebody that looks like them that is struggling with the same things as them saying like, this was helpful and I actually thought it wasn't, and this is why it helped me, helps them have that emotional buy-in. I think there's also just like the people that come to work with us have been following me and have been supporting my content for a while, so they understand what our like philosophy is, and they come in and they're like, I haven't lifted weights, I'm a little bit scared, but like based off everything you've been saying, like I understand this is what I need to do. So they're a little bit warmer in terms of like understanding what our philosophy is. I don't know necessarily how to have that conversation with somebody who has no idea whatsoever. Besides, truthfully, I think like proof is powerful. And again, psychology is important here. Like, I think overly explaining the science to somebody who doesn't really even understand much science isn't very helpful. And just being able to share experiences and stories from people that have gone through what they're going to go through is by far the most powerful way. That said, I will try to explain a little bit about what we talked about, right? How muscle is important for metabolism. I'll use pretty simple terminology like your metabolism is healthier and better and faster if you have more muscle, and it's slower and unhealthier if you don't have muscle. And I overly simplify it simply just so the message lands. I know sometimes when we have like a little bit more nuanced conversations, these things or sayings aren't fully accurate, but I think there's also a fine balance between 100% accuracy and then just like conveying things in a way that a lay person will just understand what you're saying overall, right? So I might say something along the lines of like, if you're just doing a ton of cardio and you're dieting a ton, you're going to lose a lot of muscle mass. I preface that with a nuanced conversation because like, it depends. You're not just going to lose 10 pounds of muscle mass like this overnight because you just like did a bunch of cardio. We know that's not necessarily true. But you definitely can accelerate the rate of muscle loss if you're using the wrong strategies for weight loss, right? And that's a nuanced conversation, but I will express how important it is to maintain muscle mass and talk about like the importance of strength training and how that contributes to muscle mass and how that's actually going to make fat loss easier long term. I like using the analogy, if there are women that are listening to this, doing cardio is like putting money in a savings account, right? In terms of like, you put $500 in a savings account, you burn 500 calories doing cardio, but that money's not really growing. It's true. Like you burn 500 calories, that's kind of it. Doing an hour of cardio would be like putting $500 in a savings account. Doing an hour of lifting might be more like putting $200 in an investment account. It's like today, right now, it's less calories, it's less money. But if you let it compound over time, it'll be more, right? And so objectively today, if you do cardio, you will burn more calories with the cardio than you do with the weight training. But if you focus on building muscle over the next coming months and years, you will actually be able to just maintain a leaner physique easier because you'll be in a healthier metabolic state. So that's how I like to explain that. Maybe you haven't thought of that one, and feel free to steal it.
Actually heard
Yeah, that's
that.
a great analogy.
I'm not gonna lie, I've never heard it like that. That makes a lot of sense.
I'm going to license that shit.
Yeah, I
you
was about to
should.
say, that was pretty good. Finances, yes.
So I only think of these analogies because I have these conversations every day, multiple times. And so a big part of what I've tried to do, and we were joking before the call, before the show, that I'm like, I feel like I'm not as smart as I was throughout my PhD. It's because when I was doing my PhD, I was in this academic space where it's like, I need to talk about things as complex as I possibly can to sound really smart. And the longer I've been doing this, I've tried doing the complete opposite. It's like, how can I keep these things as simple as possible so the person actually understands the message while still keeping a certain degree of scientific accuracy? Because obviously we want to be evidence-based as evidence-based practitioners. But sometimes the fluff and the context is more confusing than anything else. And using an analogy like investing versus putting money in a savings account lands way harder than talking about BMR and the contributions of muscle mass.
That's like where one of the ones that I like to use is like how do you talk to somebody? You can't talk at them. But if you talk to somebody of a story that is parallel to the person, since you're not talking at them, they receive it better because it's not like you're wrong. And the one I was just telling your sister about, and I was telling you about last night, it's like, did you know that the average RD when they're tracking their own calories is, because like this happens a lot. I'm eating 1,300 calories a day or whatever, and I'm not losing weight. Well, you and I both know you're not eating actually 1,300 calories, but you can't tell the person that because that's going to mess with their whole psyche. So it's like you align it close, but it's not the same. And like the average RD underpredicts their own calorie intake by around 20%. So if someone who's trained in this is off on their own by 10, 20%, what do you think you are as the average person that has never been trained in years of education? So I'm not saying you may actually believe you're eating 1,300 calories a day, but the professionals aren't even that good. So you may open the door to, hey, you may be just under predicting what you're actually eating.
Yeah.
And like that's like how I do it is for myself is that you can't talk at them, but if you create something that's close on the side, it helps land it without being abrasive.
Yeah. And if even just to take that specific example one step further, I like to not make the assumption that they're not eating 1,300 calories, even though I know they're probably not. Because if you just go immediately into an adjacent story, it kind of like, yeah, you're not talking at them, but you're making the assumption that there is something wrong there. I'll usually just like lean in and be curious and be like, I'm curious, like, how do you know you're eating 1,300 calories? And like that question alone, they're like, oh, I don't know. I looked at and I'm like, are you weighing the stuff? They're like, no. Have you ever weighed the stuff? Like, yeah, but like months ago, I kind of just like eyeball it. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, I gotcha. You're eyeballing 1,300 calories. We're probably not actually there. And we just want to double check that we're doing that. And then that usually also kind of makes them realize like, oh yeah, I'm just saying stuff for the sake of saying stuff, but I don't really know what I'm saying. Because that does happen really often.
No, 100%.
And I know you have a
hard stop, correct?
frame. So is there any
we can go a couple more minutes. It's all good.
Are there any, so we talked about nutrition and we talked about exercise. What other factors additionally do you focus on?
Yeah, I wanted to bring up the third pillar, which is just lifestyle. A lot of women in this age range like to hang out with their women friends and have wine in the afternoons, right? And jokes aside, obviously everybody's different, but alcohol consumption is just so, at least based off the clients that we've worked with, the population that I've been exposed to, and even just like my immediate environment, it's just so normalized. Having a drink or two after work is just normal. And in my opinion, if you have 1 or 2 drinks pretty much every day, it's a lot. And specifically as we age, it just has a bigger impact on the way we feel, the way we rest and recover, right? Like the same way I was talking about earlier, how sleep is so important because it impacts all these other things negatively. Alcohol kind of has the same impact on all those things as poor sleep does. Plus the double whammy of like also making you sleep poorly, right? And people might be listening like, well, when I drink, I knock out. It's like, yeah, but like your sleep quality is not there, right? So alcohol consumption is huge. Alcohol is extremely calorically dense. Sometimes people eat 1,200 calories and are not counting the calories in their wine. Let's be honest, when we're tipsy or we're drunk, we're also not making the best food choices. So sometimes you're like, I eat pretty healthy, and then you have some wine and you snack, and then you like didn't really remember that you even did that, right? So alcohol is huge. I think the biggest mindset shift overall when it comes to this stuff is like truly adopting the mindset of living a healthy lifestyle, not just trying to do stuff to lose weight. Because if you're just trying to do stuff to lose weight without addressing the context, like the totality of your lifestyle and your habits, this might be the realest piece of advice you might hear. If you relate to this, it's like, it's never going to work, right? If you're trying to diet and exercise, but you're drinking every day and sleeping like crap, it's not going to work. Like at some point, it's going to backfire. So we really need to address all of these factors as a more like holistic approach to health, even though I hate that word because it's been hijacked.
I agree.
But right, like having a holistic approach where we're actually trying to live a healthy lifestyle, and then our body composition improves as a byproduct of living an overall healthy lifestyle. We don't do things with the goal of like losing weight. Yes, I understand that is a goal for a lot of people. We need to do things to live a healthier lifestyle so that our body composition and the way our body composition, body weight changes in a favorable way as a byproduct of living a healthier lifestyle. So when I mentioned that third pillar being lifestyle, I'm mentioning things like alcohol, poor sleep, prioritizing your sleep, things like stress management, right? Things like prioritization, making sure you're actually prioritizing your health and fitness, making sure you're setting yourself up for success when it comes to this stuff, because the lifestyle stuff is so incredibly important, right? Like if you don't truly make these things a priority, if you don't focus on living a healthy lifestyle, limiting alcohol, managing stress, sleeping well, it doesn't matter if you follow a diet plan or a workout plan. That's what I was trying to allude to earlier when I was talking about lifestyle. Yeah, David.
100%. And actually, I think it's a great story, just as we kind of wrapped up how important lifestyle is. And we have to have, once you become an adult, and this is going to sound condescending, I'm sorry. Being a part of adult is doing things that everything has give and take. And you have to accept the fact that I'm going to do something that may involve less fun or whatever that may be for the betterment of myself. And the reason, and like, there's a little bit like sometimes you got to grow up, and just because you want to do something doesn't mean what you should do. And the reason why I alluded to that, Lara, talk about the extreme nature of when you were really getting into CrossFit and you were working a full FTE and you were like, I can't hit my workout routine, do what everything I do, get my quality sleep. Tell us that story, because it's like, here's someone as a physician at the peak of her practice in the traditional, like trying to hit these hours. What ended up happening?
Yeah, so I had a friend, Kristen, and she was like, well, just reduce your hours. And I was like, well, it's never even occurred to me to think about doing that. But so I could still be considered full-time by going from 1.0 FTE to like 0.8 or something, 0.82. And so I cut out 4 hours out of my work week. And that allowed me to shift my schedule enough that I could work out in the morning. And then I was able to eat well after work and go to bed on time. And so that took adjustment and a slight pay cut and things like that. But I would never go back to how I had done it before. It was the best decision ever.
Yeah, that's a great story. And what I would say is, like, for most people, it doesn't even get to that extreme, right? It's just like they just don't prioritize their health and fitness at all. It's not like they literally don't have time. Obviously, time has to come from someplace, but it's usually like watching some Netflix, right? And
Sure.
I don't know if this person said it originally, but it's where I heard it from, and I think he got it from somewhere else. There is this business guy that I really like to follow for business advice. His name's Alex Hormozy.
Yeah.
And yeah, Alex is the GOAT, dude. Total aside, I just went to his live book launch, and it was the most epic event. Anyways,
yep.
You went to?
No, I wasn't there. I just listened.
Okay. Anyways, what he says is that most people, and he's talking about it in the context of like entrepreneurship, but it really applies to every aspect of your life in terms of like, if you have a particular goal you want to work towards. Most people trade long-term happiness and comfort for short-term happiness and comfort. Meaning that you do things that make you feel good now in the moment, but actually make you feel like crap long-term, right? You know you shouldn't watch another hour of Netflix when it's 10 p.m. because you have to go to bed. But you do it anyways because you want to watch the stupid show. So now you're super tired in the morning and you skip your workout. Now you're frustrated with yourself because you weren't able to do the thing that you said you were going to do, which actually causes more internal turmoil than not watching the stupid show, right? So we trade long-term happiness for short-term happiness. But the thing is that those short-term comforts never actually provide us the happiness that we want in life, because it's not about like just getting a quick little dopamine hit at the moment, right? So I think being able to be aware of those things, because sometimes people aren't even aware of how their behaviors really negatively impact their ability to achieve their long-term goals. Like, that awareness is incredibly important to be able to start actually making the right changes and really considering and having a deep, whether it's a conversation with somebody you're close to, or even just like a deep thought experiment around like, what are your goals and what sacrifices actually need to be made to achieve those goals? And are those sacrifices actually worth it to you? Because sometimes they're not. Many times they are. And this is why sometimes just like superficial goals of losing 10 pounds or 20 pounds or whatever it is, sometimes people struggle to do it just because it's just not that important. People say it is, but it's truly just not that important. I remember I had a client once. He was already in great shape. He was already super healthy. He was probably like, I don't know, 17% body fat. Super healthy guy. He was muscular, but he wanted to be, like low teens, have visible abs. And he was, I don't remember what his profession was, but he did pretty well. He was successful. He had a family. He liked going out with his wife for date nights like twice a week. He would go out to dinner with his daughter for ice cream once a week and like taking her out to dinner. And he was like, dude, I just don't want to give those things up. And he was getting really frustrated with his inability to like lose further body fat. And I was like, hey man, let me ask you a question. What the hell does having a six pack mean to you? And he's like, I think it'd be cool. And I was like, well, man, to be honest, if you want to have a six pack, you either have to exercise more because it's going to take time away from your family and you have to burn more calories, or you literally have to give those things up because his diet was like already really healthy on paper. There wasn't much to change. And I was like, you can't go out to dinner 2 or 3 times a week and not be focused on your caloric intake, because that's the level that you're at, right? Like the leaner you get, the harder it becomes and the more tedious you have to be. And he was like, yeah, man, that makes perfect sense. And after you put it that way, it just like, it doesn't matter. Like, and then his goal immediately changed and there was no more stress. So there's sometimes just like not alignment between what our desires are and what's actually important to us, because we never have that internal conversation of like, do I actually want this? Am I willing to do the things that I need to do to get there? Anyways, I will stop with my philosophy lessons now.
No, that's all very important. Because I mean, probably from even patient standpoint. Well, this is what I want. Well, do you actually? Because we can do it, but then all of a sudden you start poking holes and you're like, no, they don't actually want it. I was like, okay, cool. At least you're aware.
No, I think that's a good final point, and I think that was fantastic, helpful, and I think I will take a lot of things you said and use them for my patients, which will be
Thank you.
awesome.
Yeah.
And
I hope it's helpful, the analogies.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, they are. I'm going to definitely be using some of those. Where can people find you, or if they want to work with you, how do they do that?
Yeah, happy to share. And first and foremost, thank you guys for having me. This was a ton of fun. It's cool to see David actually acting up, not acting a fool.
Yeah, I was about to say, is it weird that I've kind of been wholesome this whole time?
Yeah, Lara keeps you in line.
Tries to.
Jokes aside, if you guys want to connect with me anywhere on social media, it's just Dr. Joey Munoz. All social media is YouTube. My podcast is the Dr. Joey Munoz Show. If you want to work with us, our website is fitforlifeacademy.health. And if you want to learn more about what we do, I have a completely free ebook that just talks more about like our philosophies when it comes to nutrition and training and that stuff. And you could probably find it on every post I make on social media because I always promote it, or just at fitforlifeacademy.health/blueprints. See how well prepared I was for that?
You've said that a couple
one after the other. Let's go, baby.
Well, hey, it was an honor and a privilege for you being on here. We talked about doing a beach house trip this year. It's probably not going to happen, so we're going to have to do it next year. And that's because of you, not me. We had space. You never asked. I was just not.
It's hard, dude.
He's got a family.
He's got a family, but we will be down in Florida for Christmas. So
sweet. We'll be
you gonna be there? Cool. So we'll make sure we link up when we're down there.
Yeah, I'd love that.
Because he's in Tampa, guys. He's kind of a big. It's nice and warm there all the time. It's not here.
We'll go to the beach during Christmas.
Perfect. I look forward to it. Well,
all right, well, it was an honor and privilege, everyone. Appreciate you for being on, and have a phenomenal day, and we'll talk to you all shortly.